Welcome back to the That Games podcast, where we talk about the saddest games around. Today, we are going to talk about The Last of Us Part 1 from meeting Tommy and the university up until Ellie meets David. Anybody want to call out some of their highlights at the top of this?
I've got a lot of thoughts and notes. I want to wait until we get to the moments of the story, but I do think that the first encounter with David is a really particularly chilling moment.
I just want to shout out horseback riding. I think that's such a neat element of the game that we get in Jackson.
Oh, I'll say, yeah, with that, just the introduction here of tracking, because you track Ellie, then with David, you're tracking a deer. Just really cool use of the environment and just interesting mechanic that they introduce that I don't really feel like is utilized as much after this kind of chapters.
I was going to say that other than the Bill episode, this is where they departed the most in the television series. And I love the creative liberties they took while still being very true to the source material. So let's get into that. Okay, so we just left Henry and Sam, and it's like a very solemn end to a chapter. And in my opinion, is the first official catalyst to the final character decisions that both Joel and Ellie will take. I think this soft locks in their final decision and ultimate character evolution. And we're going to see other variables play out in the next couple chapters that really lock in their final acts. And I think that's what we're going to really get into today, is especially Ellie and David. I think that locks in who she's going to become. All right. So they're already going to Jackson, right? Because Joel intended to go see Tommy, and they happen across the dam where they already were, and they encounter Marlene with this sort of meet cute of sort.
Meet threaten.
So how are these characters reset? What's the tone of this opening sequence?
It's a lot lighter, and you see Joel starting to let his guard down. Like, before, in previous chapters, Joel is really like a blank wall. He's like, I don't really want to chat with you, Ellie. Like, you're my job. I promised someone I would take care of you. And it's all business. And you see him, he's starting to let his guard down. They're not really palling around, but they're almost chatting. They're being more conversational with each other. And so you can see Joel being more comfortable with Ellie and letting her in.
There's a big time lapse, right? At the beginning of this chapter, we get that at least a couple months has elapsed since they left the Henry and Sam saga to getting to Jackson.
Right. They kind of segmented into 4 acts, right? Because they do the season
and now
transitions.
We're in fall in Jackson. Just adding to that rapport that you begin to see develop more organically with Joel and Ellie. Like, there's not any more forced conversation. Clearly, they've seen some more crap over the last couple months, and they've had more escapades that we don't even take part in the video game. I love the detail of how much more organic and natural their conversation is, because it feels like they've seen some more stuff, even though we don't experience it. They've clearly bonded deeper, or at least more organically, in a way that, like you said, Eric, I think some of their guards are down. Certainly Joel, anyway, some of his guards are down. Ellie knows where all the chinks in his armor are for the most part at this point.
I'm just thinking to travel from Pittsburgh
on
to
foot.
Wyoming on foot. Maybe
like
maybe a car here and there. That's a while. One thing I really appreciated in this, just the transition between chapters, is the wardrobe change.
Little details, yeah.
And it's just little details where it's, okay, this is a different feeling moment. It is, you're in these clothes that you just went through hell with. And then it's almost like this. You took a shower, got new clothes on, everything feels clean again coming into Jackson.
Yes, it's a fresh start for this next segment of character evolution. There was a juxtaposition that I thought was jarring to shake you and help you reset, but it was like, because we literally just saw the whole Henry and Sam thing, smash cut to actually things are brighter and breezier than you might have expected, but they do challenge this right before they get to the dam. If you happen to take the side path to seeing the child's grave, and that Joel's, we're not going to talk about this. And the obvious undercurrent is Sarah. Having played this game enough times, I don't think I appreciated. Does Ellie even know about Sarah at this point in the game?
She doesn't, yeah. Because in a minute, we hear that Joel and Ellie have another conversation later in this episode where Ellie says, Maria told me about Sarah. And so at this point, she doesn't know about As far as we, the players, know, it hasn't missed.
And it's also that conversation by the child's grave, which is beautiful and heartbreaking. She talks about having the robot for Sam. She said, "It's this stupid robot. I forgot to leave it on Sam's grave."
He didn't notice.
Yeah, that's why I was like, you carried a robot in your backpack for a month and you didn't talk about oops. Oh my gosh, there's a giant plastic. Cool.
If Ellie didn't notice it for months, it would have been fine for Sam to have.
Henry's character flaw right there.
He hates robots.
All robots don't know.
And that was his downfall.
But that little detail, I mean, that she's carried this robot across the country and that she has the thought to leave it at the child's grave there. That, like you said, this is a whole lot of foreshadowing going on and more stuff we've learned about Ellie, like carrying that robot. I do think even, I don't know so much that it was, oh my gosh, this robot, I didn't know I had this. To carry it across miles and miles and months of time, she's carrying pieces of her past along with her, which we see greatly contrasted when Joel is faced with the picture that Tommy offers him. I think that's offering us a juxtaposition there. I think that little detail, which was optional, I don't think you have to walk by the child's graveside. But that optional detail is so beautiful. She's chosen to carry this thing that is completely impractical, but is a memento of someone who was important to her on her journey. And Joel chooses to not carry that kind of baggage with him.
That actually kind of foreshadows later in this segment when Ellie runs off because she knows that Joel's trying to ditch her. That is, in my opinion, a juxtaposition to when Ellie jumps off the truck to stick with Joel after Sam and Henry bounce. And that says a lot about who she is. She's loyal. She's in solidarity with Joel. The first chance that Joel gets, he tries to ditch her. And this is the ultimate betrayal. But I do think Joel in his picture of Sarah, as much as the robot with Ellie, foreshadows this is the type of characters that they are. One holds on and one wants to let go. And that's why they're like ships passing in the night on this sequence, and Joel has to be corrected. So we encounter Tommy and Maria at the dam. It's a shorter sequence than I remember. What do we discover about Joel through the lens of Tommy? What does he do to give us new context?
It's just Joel and Tommy. They have a conversation. Joel goes to tell Tommy about Ellie and her situation and why it's important for Joel to take Ellie to where she needs to go. And they have this conversation where Joel's, "You owe me." And Tommy's, "I owe you?" Like, excuse me, what? Joel says, "All those years I took care of us." And then Tommy comes back and says, "I've got nothing but nightmares from those years." And it just shows that Joel is surviving and Tommy is with Joel because he's his brother. And I imagine that's what maybe caused the rift, is that Joel was trying to survive and doing pretty much anything he needed to. And Tommy was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I've got nothing but nightmares from this. And so I think it shows an interesting, like, willingness to do terrible things, pretty much.
That willingness to stomach the violence and the inhumanity to survive in this world. I think in that same conversation, doesn't Tommy say, "I'd have been better off"? Like, alluding to, "I've been better off if you'd let me die than go through all the crap that we went through during those nightmare years." That's dark. That's some really dark stuff.
Right.
So I love the history that we pick up in the conversations with Tommy, that you learn a lot more about their backstory and about the dark period, the 20-year time lapse we get after Sarah's death before we catch back up with Joel.
Yeah. The more overt friction between them is Tommy is a joiner and an ideologue. And say Joel doesn't want anything to do with being an ideologue. That's his underlying friction with everything else that's going on.
Ideologies for suckers.
Because they already had that friction before, but that was like the breaking point, is Tommy's being traumatized by Joel's
Believe
behavior.
in nothing, kids, because it won't believe back in you. That's what I learned. That's what I learned.
Believe
Joel.
back.
But it's also that ideology, the ideologue that Tommy is, also what took him from the Fireflies and led him to family. Because he tells Joel in that same conversation, "I have family now. Family is my purpose." Because Joel ribs him about the Fireflies. And Tommy says, "I'm not about that anymore. Family." And so he's got a new ideology, and I'd argue a pretty good one. Family seems like a good enough reason. But it begs the question, like, isn't Joel family? So for Tommy to say that, "I've got family," meaning Mariah, or possibly meaning these other people at the dam, chosen family, and his blood brother is right in front of him. How deep does that family ideology run, Tommy? Because you apparently didn't think you and Joel could make it together anymore. Or if we put more of the impetus on Joel for why they couldn't be together, which I think Tommy certainly would describe it that way. I find it interesting that his new ideology is family. And Joel tries to appeal to Tommy, I think, in a cheap shot and a low blow, saying, this is the cure for the world and you fireflies. And he's trying to appeal to Tommy in a way that he should have just approached him as his brother. I think he would have had a much more effective way approaching Tommy using the ideology of family. But Joel's not capable of doing that, or at least not right here. We don't see that he's there.
We actually, see a complete bifurcation between Joel in the game and on the television series, in that in the game, he deploys a lot of subterfuge. He tries to manipulate Tommy with their history, then he tries to do it with his ideology. And then when he encounters Ellie later, he uses a lot of projection in these defense mechanisms instead of just overtly saying why he's afraid. In the show, one of the most powerful scenes of the entire season is when he just cripples and he breaks, and he's already realized that he's closer to Ellie than he wants to be. And he has just a very candid moment. It was just a cleaner way as far as like, okay, we have less hours to get through as much content, and we're going to tell it through Jackson instead of the dam and really consolidate storylines. But it allowed Pedro Pascal's best or second best scene in the entire season of just like unraveling because he's vulnerable. This is the first time we see him be raw and exposed. And he uses that to try to appeal to Tommy.
Well, two things I want to mention. I don't know if anyone's mentioned that. I think Maria was pregnant, right? Was that
That's
Just
just
the
game
TV
and the
show,
TV
yeah.
show?
Mhm.
That is just in the show. That's, I'm sure, a bit of a slap in the face of I'm trying to move on with my family and I have a kid coming along. And that just reminds Joel of the family that he used to have and was taken away from him. And so it must be really hard to see his brother trying to move on and have this picture perfect family in life that he wasn't able to get. So that really sucks. And I don't remember
That
my
picture
other point.
perfect family, Emerlie, though, it's interesting because they mention while they're at the dam, Tommy's saying that life that we didn't think people could live anymore, we're doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure that totally just washes over Joel like a load of crap. But I think adding the detail of Maria being pregnant in the TV show is a beautiful detail. I wish she were pregnant in the game, because for Tommy, that super raises the stakes of this white picket fence post-apocalyptic life that he's trying to live with his family. Like her being pregnant and having a baby. Plus, I think that's so much more pointed and stinging to Joel when he sees Tommy having all the things that Joel used to have but didn't work out.
Yeah, can I point a quick anecdote of the only way I can relate this to my own life is Eric in college, right? Because here is Eric just having his ish in college, and then suddenly and we're all single, we're all living the bachelor pad life, and Eric's still trying to figure out how to navigate his own life, and it didn't seem like it was all put together before this girl pops out of nowhere, this perfect girl for Eric, and it's like, why does Eric get everything that I'm trying so hard? I'm trying not to be offensive, right? But like, you decided college wasn't for you, and it's okay, then why do you get to be married? Why do you get the perfect life? But here I am being
Drop out of school,
lonely.
kid.
Drop out of school, kids.
Drop out of
Believe in
school.
nothing.
That's how it works.
Or it worked out really well for me. Yeah.
We loved you still perfectly fine, but it was just like, okay, but our lives are better together at this moment in our lives. Why is Eric getting everything? And I relate that to how Joel and Tommy is. It's, what are you doing differently that I can't have this?
I actually want to point out something. I actually do remember my other point. So going back to when they meet Henry and Sam in the TV show, they talk about how he has hearing damage. You see at the beginning of that episode when he starts to open up to Ellie, and I believe he actually sleeps on his good ear. He falls asleep telling jokes with her all night. And so he can't hear out of his bad ear. And that is how Henry and Sam were able to sneak up on him when they were in that, where he can just vault over anything and tackle all of these infected and people. he's a little bit more worn down overall. That must be really hard for him.
That's something that I agree with you. I feel like in the show, what happens is Joel, he gets Ellie to Tommy, and then he's okay, Tommy, now you got to take it the rest of the way. You know where to go. And when he does that in the game, it seems like the reason he's doing it is because I can feel myself emotionally attaching to this girl, and I don't want that. And it's, please, you take her. It's not my problem anymore. And it feels that way a lot in the game, but in the show, it feels a lot more of Joel. I don't think I can do this. Tommy, I need your help. I feel like you can do this. You're strong enough. I'm old and I'm not strong enough. Ellie's best chances are with you. It feels that way in the show. In the game, it doesn't. It feels more selfishly motivated.
Okay, so I want to keep this thing moving along. We have a pivotal moment in the early dam scene where Tommy offers a picture of Sarah after having revisited Austin, and Joel does the unexpected and he turns down the picture. What does this reveal about his character? Is it just on the nose? We already could have anticipated him doing this.
This really hit me. And not so much actually saying not taking the picture, but just the way he said it. Just so nonchalant. Nah, I'm good. Like somebody offered him something to eat and he was full. Which is like, nah, I'm good. But like for me, I feel like Joel is just trying to bury his past. And he's doing a really poor job at it. He's not necessarily doing a great job of forgetting it because those feelings still stick with him. I think there's a subconscious part of Joel and the trauma he went through with Sarah that he's just trying to bury down, but it's a driving factor in every decision he makes, which I think is a really interesting psychological dynamic to Joel's character. And when he's confronted with it, he immediately shoves it down again.
I'm curious if he would have made a different decision had we not just come off the cusp of the Sam and Henry debacle and for it to have resurfaced and made those wounds very
fresh.
I don't know, because he's already displayed that he wants to mute his emotions. But I do think that made it too raw again. And at least that's how it felt because we're only like 10 minutes into this new sequence. That's the last thing that's on your mind. All right. Tommy first refuses his call to action. And then we just have this played out sequence with, are they raiders, hunters? Bandits.
Get it
bandits.
right.
Bad guys.
Bandit.
Also, I just want to point out, there's different factions of humans, and it's subtle. You have hunters in Pittsburgh.
Yep.
You have bandits in the wilderness of Jackson. And then in the show, you have raiders, whatever Bill's town's name is. I can't remember. Lincoln?
Oh, right. That's where I got raiders from.
Yeah.
I think like The Walking Dead, they all have different names too for the
depending
zombies.
on where you're located, because they don't communicate with each other. I do think that was one of the best details of The Walking Dead.
The same thing has different names depending on where you are.
We've walked all the way to the end of the dam where they're setting up the electrical grid and they get it working. And that's when the encounter happens. And that's where Tommy says, no, I'm not going to do this for you. And then we get this fight sequence. And by the end of it, Tommy changes his mind and he says, I'm going to take Ellie. But what is it between those two moments that says, I'm going to do this for you now, Joel?
When Ellie and Joel reunite in that moment and she's freaking out and she's, oh my gosh, like this just happened and blah, 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 blah. And he's, calm down. Are you okay? And Tommy watching them interact and he's like, oh shit, like, I got to do this, Maria. I got to take care of her and I've got to do this for my brother, because he's realizing that Joel is starting to care for Ellie and that's going to be really hard for him.
Very clear that they're important to each other. And then Tommy, you could see him looking at him. And it's that exact thing, exactly what you said, where he's just, oh, shoot, I'm going to have to do this.
Why does Tommy feel obligated to do this for Joel other than him seeing that Ellie appears to be a proxy for Sarah to Joel? What is it about Tommy and Joel's connection that he wants to help Joel despite their past?
I wonder if there's some guilt there because Tommy was not able to get to Sarah in time before they were gunned down. And so maybe there's some remainder guilt from that.
I definitely think that there's probably shades of that in there, that Tommy wasn't able to save them the first time around. I also think he gives you all the breadcrumbs right at the top of this episode. He says, I'm all about family. And despite the nightmares that he experienced with Joel immediately following the apocalypse, I think he sees in Joel and Ellie in that moment, and he can't deny that Joel is still his brother. that he loves him, that he would do anything to protect him. And he lets time and distance, like we all do, let time and distance, like put wedges in our relationship. But like the really best relationships, no amount of time and distance can really sever that bond. If it's really strong, if there's a real genuine connection, and that's with family, that's with chosen family, time and distance doesn't take that away. It might make it rusty at first, but reconnecting, I think, was inevitable. The moment Joel showed up, it was inevitable that Tommy was going to reconcile with him or kill him. Like, I don't think there was another choice for them. Tommy says he's a family man, and I believe it.
Just another anecdote, but it's like Luke and I have known each other for about 20 years now. And this was something that Heather called out a few weeks ago. She's, wait a second. So you didn't talk to Luke for 7 years and now you're talking every day? And that kind of feels like the moment that's better portrayed in the TV show where Joel sees Tommy from across the way. And it's, you have this built up idea of what this encounter is going to look like. And it's still, you know that this is really how it would play out, is despite everything else, you couldn't fake that you're relieved even if you're holding all that baggage, because that bond is so important that it transcends that, at least temporarily.
Those ties run deep, man. It's hard to, even if you want to, it's hard to break some of those ties. You see it with people who have traumatic experiences with family. At the end of the day, they're family. And cutting those ties is not simple, even if you want to, even if you think they deserve it, even if they did something terrible to you. Those things get really messy.
To that point, when it's like, when we weren't talking as actively with Luke, all of us, because Luke decided to compartmentalize temporarily, despite some anger or whatever that I felt over the last years and how we all got through that, in my heart, I felt like I'm fine with it and I've moved on. But I knew deep down that it was inevitable that our paths would cross again because there was no other alternative. And so I just needed to play out, what was that going to look like? And I think that's the same for Tommy and Joel have gone down completely different paths and they are not on the same page at all, but it is inevitable. And it creates some like beautiful conflict, but it's told through the prism of we're family. And I think all of us experience, like, you have to love your family, but by no means are you all going to be on the same page after you cross 20 or 30.
Everyone becomes their own individual at some point.
Yeah. So that moment for us is like Thanksgiving every year, but we have to do it.
I definitely see Shan too often.
Right. Nah, I'm good.
Less is better.
Well, video games, it's funny, because this is a video game themed podcast. But that's been a big reason why I've been able to keep in touch with people who are important to me. Like, we've talked about this in private conversations, Shan, too. But also, like, my brothers and I getting together on Sunday nights sometimes to play Minecraft. There was a phase, Phasmophobia, which is a current phase, which shout out to Phasmophobia if none of you know that game. But it's been the excuse for us to get together on a regular basis. Because I think the older you get, the easier it is to rest on the laurels of a relationship and know that it's good. And as long as it's not going bad or going downhill, it's easy for you to put a relationship on the shelf and say, that's in a good place. And you don't always nurture it and tend it as actively. Maybe you feel like you don't need to for reasons of longevity or time and distance. But like, making the excuse to stay in contact has been really helpful and has been a big deal. I know for me and my brothers, video games has just happened to be the medium through which we do that. But for Tommy and Joel, right, there's no getting online to Mega Box on Sunday night and play Destiny for 6 straight hours, Tucker.
I would have solved
so many problems. They just could have played Destiny all night. They could have worked through some stuff.
Yeah. Farming of Destiny's Treasure Cave.
Remember that Loot Cave, the early
relationship
days? All those exotics.
Oh,
They had to do it the
OG.
normal human way.
Yeah.
Like peasants.
All right. So Ellie overhears all of this go down between Tommy and Joel, and she bounces. And then they follow her on horseback. And then we have my favorite moment of the entire game. So this is the moment for me that the remake justified its price tag. For Tucker, you said that it was Sam and Henry. And that was your first moment at least. But like the sequence between Joel and Ellie gets me to cry every single time. The acting is phenomenal. It's because they do a lot of close-up shots of Ellie and her eyes just destroy me every single time because it feels so real. And here's somebody who just feels like an empty shell of herself for loss. But Joel challenges that his loss is greater and that it shouldn't be compared. And I was curious what everybody else thought about that. Is Joel justified in saying the loss of my daughter is greater than any loss that
Absolutely
you might
not.
have had? Because
Absolutely. I want to, well, at least you
Okay.
might have a different answer, but Joel was saying to Ellie right there, you experience it as the player for Joel, and losing his daughter shapes him and rips his heart and soul out, and that's painful. And while all of that is painful, to compare the loss of your loved one and just assume that nobody else in this world and everyone in this world they're living in has lost their family. Everyone has lost people. Everyone has lost parents. Everyone has lost siblings. Everyone has lost children. And for Joel to be that selfish with it, and I use the word selfish not to be like, oh, Joel, you're such an idiot. You're so shallow. You're selfish in that he keeps all of that grief and all of that hurt to himself rather than allowing that grief and that hurt to open up to a collective humanity of pain and hurt in the apocalypse. He keeps it all to himself in a very selfish way. And if he were willing to allow someone else to carry that yoke with him, if he were willing to open up that grief and share it, it would make the grief easier to bear, but he'd also see how he's not the only person who's lost everyone important to him in his life. And so I think that's really hurtful for him to say that to Ellie. That's really hurtful for him to just assume his pain is bigger than anything she could possibly understand. And when he says, you can't understand what loss, you don't know what loss is.
you don't
Yeah,
understand the
I'm
truth.
like, that's
No.
that's a load, Joel. And if you took 2 seconds to be less selfish, you would see what a load of crap that is.
I agree with what you're saying, Luke, like 1,000% on just kind of Joel's unfair treatment of Ellie's loss. But looking through the lens of Joel's loss is more needless than everybody else's loss in that context. Like Sarah, maybe she's with Joel, maybe survives for years into adulthood, but you have some army guy before things really went bad shoot them because she may be infected.
Forcefully taken from him.
Yeah. And then Ellie, it's more a natural consequence of the world they live in. It doesn't minimize the loss, but I can see where Joel is coming from of just my loss is worse because it was in a different way. What loss is loss. I agree that's not fair. And I think Joel comes around to that after the conversation and the ride back to Jackson.
I would say, and to Luke's point, I think that Joel was trying to be hurtful a little bit because he can feel himself getting closer to Ellie. And then when Ellie challenges that relationship and says, hey, you're important to me, Joel, I think, starts putting those walls back up because Ellie comes in and says, you told me about Sarah, and I'm really sorry you lost your daughter, but I've lost people too. And they have some words. And then at the end of the conversation, Joel goes, you're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad. And just, again, going back to the facial capture and of those moments, like you see those emotions in Ellie's eyes and kind of the protectiveness in Joel's face. And there's a moment where he says, you have no idea what loss is. It sounds dumb and little, but he like lifts his lip up and he looks almost like a snarling dog where he's like in attack mode. And it's just this like ultimate level of emotional defense where Joel looks mad at Ellie, where it's like, you're treading on mighty thin ice. Don't talk about this. And it's just such an emotionally charged conversation. And towards the end of it, Joel, it starts to feel emotionally vulnerable. So he just shuts it down by saying something that he knows will hurt Ellie.
I think he already knew what he wanted the outcome to be. He already decided he wanted to get rid of Ellie, and he was trauma dumping to be able to justify it. And I think this kind of speaks to like all the subterfuge that we see in this character between his encounter with Tommy and now this encounter with Ellie. We see it at the beginning of this scene where she's stop bullshitting me because he just keeps throwing down these excuses for trying to ditch her. And she's just tell me the truth. But Joel, I do think this is the most raw and legitimate excuse he has for trying to ditch her, but it's still just this cavalcade of behavior that Joel has to avoid continuing this meaningful relationship that he's starting to have.
To Eric's point about lashing out, I think he does intend to hurt Ellie a little bit in this conversation. I agree with you, Shan. He knew what he wanted the outcome to be. He went into this conversation having, as he, in his words, my mind's made up. I've already made up my mind, which he uses again after this saga, which I think is beautiful. My mind's made up, Tommy. I think he goes into that conversation with a clear idea of what he wants the outcome to be. And when it doesn't immediately go his way, he trauma dumps. He lashes out, which is easy to do with the people we know intimately and the people we care about. It's easy for us to lash out. And he also knows how to hurt her at this point. And I think he intends on some level to hurt her if it gets to his desired outcome.
But okay, so he had enough fake excuses up until this moment. I still think it's not the real reason, but it's the closest to the real reason, which is I don't want to do this because of Sarah. And so that's why it's like the most visceral, the most raw and real feeling, but it's not because you're not my daughter. It's because you are starting to feel like my daughter and I don't want that. But he still like layers it with some subtext. He tries to dodge it a little bit still. That's what I think is happening here. It is because of Sarah, but it's still not what he's saying.
Just the way that Ellie hits him when she says, everybody in my life has left me except for you. And she shoves him. I think there's just such an immediate, I don't know if you've ever experienced that where you felt so passionately or strongly in love with something that you get like physically aggressive with it. Like she doesn't know where else to put these feelings or how else to express them. And her and Joel maybe don't have like cutesy vocabulary for her to say it any other way. But the way that she does have to communicate, she shoves Joel. I think that speaks volumes. That says so much about their relationship and about how they communicate, as well as how important, how deeply important he is to her. There isn't another way that she could express this. She could go off on some soliloquy, but she didn't need to. She shoves him and says, you're fucking important to me. And that says everything.
I do want to point out that I do feel like Joel is right for the wrong reasons in that he is really justified in feeling greater loss, but he doesn't know why his loss is greater. Ellie has lost a mom, but you feel like the loss she's actually talking about is Riley. And I'm not to diminish that was love to her. And it was the most important thing in her life contextually to like the age that she was in. And so it was bigger than life and it was so meaningful. But losing a daughter it's biological and it's so much more real. But Joel doesn't know what her loss is. So he's wrong in having said it because he doesn't know what it is. I feel like it is technically correct because if I lost a daughter, the conclusion would be correct. That loss would be greater than losing somebody that you had a crush on.
But in the grand scheme of things, I think is ultimately how I feel about that. Certainly for a parent losing a child, yeah, you're going to feel that loss almost greater than anything I think you experience in the world. But to compare the tragic loss of one loved one to the tragic loss of someone else's loved one, regardless of the circumstances, I think that's just something. How do you even quantify those two things? How can you really compare the loss of those two individuals?
The last point I was going to make is I do think it was justified up until the point that Joel isn't dead. This is the moment where Ellie's about to lose something that's as important to her as Sarah was to Joel. He's about to lose a father figure. So I want to ask everybody else in this tete-a-tete, what is the moment that causes Joel to say, you're sure as hell not my daughter? What is it that he sees in Ellie in this sequence that says, you're right, I can still compartmentalize my feelings about you and my daughter? What is it that Ellie reveals about her character that makes him say that so angrily?
It could be at the top of this scene when you walk into the room, Ellie's reading a book and she's saying, is this really what girls cared about? Like boys and movies and music? And of course, if we spent so much time in the first episode talking about how much time we spent in Sarah's bedroom, looking at every artifact and everything she had on her walls and what a full life that she had lived, and you learn so much about her. And here Ellie is in what would have otherwise been a normal bedroom. She immediately seemingly to Joel, I think she immediately diminishes all of that. There's this part of my heart that breaks for Ellie because you see that, yeah, Ellie really didn't get a fair shake at a childhood in the world that she grew up in. But I think maybe there's a little bit in that moment too. Not that's the reason, but there might be a little bit in that moment where she diminishes the things that children used to care about. This stuff is so unimportant. Movies and CDs and books and whatever, posters. This is what children used to care about. And of course, those are the only memories that Joel has of Sarah now, are the things that she used to love, no matter how much pain they cause him or how he compartmentalizes it. It seems like she diminishes the memory of Sarah in that moment without meaning to, I think.
So I have a little bit of a different take. I think Joel sees so much of Sarah that it's more of this projection of just like, you sure as hell ain't my daughter, is him saying, you are so much like my daughter. I can't mentally take this. I have to white thing you. And
Go on, get out of here. I don't love you anymore.
Yeah. And I think it's just the personality, the way they banter, the way Ellie takes care of Joel in some instances, just like Sarah takes care of Joel in some instances. I think there's just so many similarities in mannerisms and how they talk to each other that it's just so much like it. So I think, yeah, Joel to me in that instance, it was a culmination of this big journey they just had, all this banter, all this talk, all these stupid jokes they've told to each other, all coming to a head where he realizes, you are like my daughter. I need to get this out of the way now.
Any other thoughts?
It's one of the best scenes in the game. It's just excellent. That's my last thought on that. Is it's just good stuff.
What do you think the Bill and Henry encounters did to create this moment of tension? Because would they have had this? I would argue, obviously, that they wouldn't have had this encounter, and maybe Ellie would have gone off with Tommy had we not had Bill and Henry before. And there's a reason they told the story in this sequence. What do those catalysts do to create this moment, this inflection
I think
point
on some level, for Joel at least, I think those two experiences reinforce his worldview that everything goes to shit eventually and I can't protect you. And I think that's terrifying for him, knowing that and Emerlie's pointed it out a couple times, like in the TV show in particular, you see the chinks in Joel's armor, you see his mortality, age catching up with him. He physically isn't as spry and agile as he used to be to physically protect Ellie. But on top of that, we saw Bill wasn't able to protect his partner. We saw Henry wasn't able to protect his brother and took his own life. And I think Joel maybe on some level feels the inevitability of it all, that this is all going to go to shit eventually, no matter what we do, no matter how hard I try. And the less capable I get, the less capable I am of protecting you. And the sooner it will be that we'll meet the same tragic end that it always does. It always goes this way. So maybe there's a bit of that. And
the moral of Bill's story was demonstrating to Joel the consequences of being alone. And the moral of the Henry and Sam saga was, these are the consequences if you decide to love someone else and protect them, and how your whole life can bottom out within seconds if you lose that anchor. And Joel took the wrong message from both of those. He decides to become Bill and he decides to be anti-Henry, and he needs to do the opposite of both of those things. But he doesn't think that he's strong enough to do what Henry couldn't. I think he sees enough flaws in who he is and his personality and his history that he thinks, I can't have a different outcome than those situations, so I'm going to run away from it.
I think this is highlighting how Joel is so much a pessimist all through all of this. But Ellie, she's such an optimist. Yeah, but Ellie's such an optimist. Like, she's always telling jokes. She's always getting excited about all these new things that she gets to explore. Even in the TV show, she's like, wow, these airplanes, that must be so amazing. He's like, not really. Like, it's something that he took for granted, but she's just so much in awe of airplanes being able to be in the sky. And he's like, they're dead now. Those people who are in that airplane, they're dead. So you're constantly seeing how pessimistic he is and how optimistic she is. And I think this is where we're seeing a clash of those two personalities. And I think she's feeling a bit of hoorah, camaraderie, and all of the stuff that they've been through. She's seen how nothing is working out for anyone else, but they keep coming together and they're getting through all these obstacles together. So she's feeling this bond of, hey, we can do anything together. And he's for how much longer?
Yeah, luck's going to run out at some point.
Yeah.
Call back to earlier line.
He always calls it luck, right? Okay, so then we leave this house with uncertainty. We think that she's going to run off with Tommy to Salt Lake. But then you encounter more bandits in the house. And after that sequence and a solemn, melancholy horse ride to some horizon, right? Joel changes his mind and says he's going to take Ellie. Is there anything in between those two moments that softens him? Or is it just like time to reflect on what Ellie said and he realized he overstepped?
To me, I think he's stewing on it. As much as he hurt, Ellie's words also hurt him a little bit. Everybody's, I think, here has had some argument with a loved one or has said things out of emotion that you don't really mean. And then after you have some time to reflect on it, you realize, oh, I was a dick. My bad. I need to apologize. Or you start to see clearly now that the emotion's out of you. So to me, that's where I saw Joel, that somber horse ride back. I imagine it's probably a lot of silence between the three of them riding back and just him and his own thoughts. Similar to Tommy, where he sees something, he's like, you know what, I got to do this, Maria. I think Joel, something is going on in his head where he's, you know what, I got to do this. And now my mind's made up. That's how I took it and imagined it happening on this somber ride back.
Nothing like a somber horse ride to kick your head into gear, get your feelings all in a row.
This is where I think that they did at least a much more articulate job in the TV show, because in the show, he pretends that he wants to give Ellie a choice as if he didn't already know that was going to be her decision.
Passive aggression works every time.
Every time. Kids, don't believe in anything and be passive aggressive.
That's how you get what you want.
The way the story is told in the game, that he eventually just softens, I do think that's realistic. It could be a human thing to do, but storytelling wise, I don't feel like it hit the beat of giving a moment that says they overstepped and I need to correct. And I think that the TV show did better in demonstrating that Joel realized that he did wrong. It's more subterfuge. He's never overtly honest to Ellie. He doesn't want to be, but he portrays it as
I think
a
in the
choice to
TV
her.
show, I think it might just be more of Mr. Pascal being super awesome. He's so good as
He's
Joel.
amazing.
There's so many things you take from watching this episode again. There's so many things you're taking from his body language, that nothing that he even overtly says, that tips you off to so much of how he's feeling and what he's concealing. He's so good at being able to show you what he's concealing while actively concealing it. Anyway, so I think there's the TV show, I agree with you, does a little bit better job giving you those moments to flesh out how he got from A to B, from the argument to, no, I'm going to see this through with Ellie. I do think, to Tucker's point, you don't get a lot of time on that somber horseback ride back, but the few shots that you do get, you see the three horses in a row and like the silhouettes and the sun and the trees, and you get this beautiful landscape, but you don't hear conversation going on. I think that one shot, even if we didn't get any other context, like you can take a lot from that picture and fill in a lot of blanks about where each of their emotional states are at and how they get there.
Yeah, it's framed as the breaking dawn and coming out of this darkness that I think really illuminates Joel's starting to come through the cloud of his own mental blocks. All right, so after this sequence, we then go to the University
of Eastern Colorado. Go Bighorns!
Just a generic Colorado university. For some reason,
Colorado School. That's the name of it.
Colorado School, University of Eastern Colorado.
Put that on a hat.
Why is Colorado always used as the backdrop for any type of college, right? Because this is where a community takes place.
Oh, yeah, it is.
It's the same school in my brain.
is.
That's
Yes.
how I, yeah.
Now, technically, this is that community, like the B-roll shots of the college and community it's near LA. It's on the outskirts of LA. Emerlie and I went there to take pictures.
Yes, it's for community. we pose in the exact same spot that Joel McHale did.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's literally that
That's the one.
pose.
That's the one. Yeah. All right. Upon entering this sequence, the dialogue is shifted again, tonally, similar to after Sam and Henry, but it's even brighter and it's a lot more like friendly, colloquial, and warm. And what is everybody's some of your favorite highlights of this sequence getting into the university?
I just like how it opens on Joel is explaining the rules of football to Ellie. And it's so foreign because it's like, when would Ellie have ever played or watched anyone play football? That she's like, this is so confusing. And Joel's like, well, you just got to play it. And the rules make sense. It's just that world is weird and foreign to Ellie that Joel's explaining the rules to football. And Ellie's like, that doesn't sound real, or like, that doesn't make any sense. And the fact that they're palling around in that way, I also like a little bit later when they're talking and Ellie's like, what did you want to be when you grew up? And Joel confides her and says, I wanted to be a singer. And Ellie just laughs. And he's like, what's funny about that? And it just shows this kind of like father-daughter dynamic really starting to build, where Ellie is teasing him and Joel is like, what?
In the TV show, didn't she ask what he used to do for a living? And he's explaining a contractor. And she's like,
Everybody
wow,
Yeah.
everyone loves contractors.
Everyone is there the best.
Can I bring up a weird point that I had a look on a map? There's this weird backtracking that they do to get to Salt Lake, because you have Jackson in
Wyoming.
western Wyoming, and then you're coming down to eastern Colorado to then get to Salt Lake.
I do think that's because of the mountains. I think they're going to take the same route as the Donner Party and go through the Hastings.
Foreshadowing,
pass.
foreshadowing. All the foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing the cannibalism. I'm really excited to get to that.
Oh no, Jen, oh no.
Yeah, I just think it's really just interesting of when you're thinking of cross country traveling and traversing, you're usually thinking, oh, hop on I-80 and shoot across. But no, they're doing this all the way around. And
That was to get to Tommy to ditch Ellie.
yeah,
Tommy said, find the big glass building. You can't miss it.
it looks like a mirror. I almost missed it.
On a clear day, it's completely see-through.
I thought that this part of the game was interesting because it seemed just like another stop on this goose chase that Joel and Ellie are on. And it was a little more gameplay heavy. There's some environmental storytelling from like the students who used to live at this university. And there's some interesting things there. But I didn't find any like really deep, meaningful war moments until right up towards the end of this chapter. It was a more gameplay heavy
I
one.
definitely feel like I found my old dorm room.
There was one for everyone.
I did
You saw
see
the
the
music room.
Yeah.
That's where I was thinking
I was
about
like,
you too.
oh, this is weird. Yeah, there were places on that campus that were well enough and specifically enough designed. I certainly found myself in real world places going there. But I did specifically feel there was that really long, narrow room with the desk and the computer on it. I was like, yeah, that's straight up the freshman dorm room.
I too am familiar with college areas.
A flunky.
I like how Ellie asks Joel, did you go to a school like this? And Joel said, no.
That's where I really empathize.
And you're like, hey-o. He did
College
go
is
to
for
college, but
suckers.
I love when you go into this area and you're trying to find the people, and then you've got all the monkeys.
Oh.
You've got Annie's boobs just jumping out of the vent. And you're just waiting for Chang to also jump out of the vents.
I feel like, do we need to explain the context for that joke or do we just let it go?
The monkeys were there to steal their pen.
Yeah.
And that's
what
why
it
the
was.
university is a bottle episode.
Yeah.
Okay, we're trying to budget for other things, other bigger sequences happening.
I was looking
later in
for
the game.
evidence
exactly.
of like paintball warfare, but I didn't find any on the
One thing I thought was interesting was just back to Eric's point on lore, just going around reading all the college student notes of just the last one of just like, I think it's like WTF, nobody's coming, of just showing how fast everybody in remote areas
Yeah,
just
you're
got
just
left
on your
behind.
own.
The Last of Us.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
last of us.
Dun-dun.
Dun, dun,
Ooh.
dun.
Right.
SVU.
It felt very real to be like, okay, you're a student, you're technically on the cusp of adulthood, but them feeling like, hey, why are adults protecting us? I'm like, oh yeah, that feels real. In that you're not technically adult, even if you're in college. And if nobody helps you, then you're going to die.
That's why you don't college.
I ran out of ramen noodles. This is it. This is the end.
Yeah,
And
but
there.
for me, that just felt very real. Of just, yeah, you have people that are quote unquote doing what they're supposed to do. They went through high school. They are going to get an education. They're on the path to adulthood. Things go to shit and they are literally left behind.
which correctly foreshadows what would have happened had they finished college.
Hey, Smarty Pants, what are you going to do? The job market's terrible. You're not going to make any money. Good luck, a-hole.
The previous generation is pulling up those
Good
ladders
luck.
behind them.
Yeah, as somebody who was unemployed with a psychology degree, it really helped.
Why don't you go pursue your passion degree? Don't do anything practical that might make you money.
They learned more than they were going to learn in college from that one note. I remember that note, and I was thinking that was worth the price of their education right there. That one thing, that one WTF, you're like, yeah, welcome to the world, jackass. No one is coming for you. That Bachelor of Arts degree wasn't going to do you any more good than that WTF did.
The military didn't see any value in saving any student on campus.
Take care of almost adults. Nah, they just let them go. Yeah.
Those who chose the route of the military instead of college,
Smart.
they're safe. They have pragmatic utility now.
So who do you think out of the cast of Community, which one would have written that note?
Troy and Abed in the morning.
Chevy Chase.
Probably Britta.
Britta.
I was thinking Britta too.
She's the most helpless.
What do you mean they're not coming?
I have a psych degree.
She hates the government, but then she expects them to come and rescue
Yeah.
her.
I love the chiron of when she's like giving soliloquy about being a psychologist, and the chiron says like not a real psychologist.
Getting rid of Britta, getting rid of the bee. She's a
G-
no good bee. She's a GDB.
It's going to be a really fun part for all of our listeners who have no idea what Community is. Let this be go watch Community. It's great.
All right,
Yes.
so let's fast forward this sequence. I do want to point out that I love in the dorm room, there is the sequence where you can see Easter eggs of Jack and Daxter
yeah,
and
huh.
Nathan Drake.
And there's a little Uncharted
callback.
thing in here. Yeah, there's a plushie. Yeah, you
Plushie.
find from Uncharted.
And I said the actual name, who is played by Nolan North, who plays David, the cannibal. So it's all
Yes, he
connected,
does.
as Emerlie
So it's-
pointed out. Not in this episode.
I actually didn't know it was the same voice actor.
Troy Baker is also in Uncharted as Sam, Nathan Drake's brother. So they're both in both games.
Is this like a Christopher Nolan universe where he only works with the same actors like over and over again?
Only with the people you trust. And eventually they will get their Oscars.
The end of this unit, like the part where they're in the university, is really interesting. They're looking all over. They're trying to find these fireflies, and they're just not there. And they find some notes and some audio recordings from a scientist that really paint a picture of what went wrong, that the fireflies had to leave and the research wasn't working, and they packed up and they left, basically. And so it's just another stop on this long journey, like really probably super disappointing for Joel and Ellie in particular. You can really see Ellie as she's looking around the room with Joel. She's like kicking her feet and her head's down, and she's just, dang it, I thought we found him. And they just don't. Interesting to see Ellie's reaction and to see her disappointment, to be like, and I really hoped that they would be here.
We see the hopeful versus cynicism fight again, where Joel comes into this room and it takes on the cynical take, and Ellie takes on the optimistic take of the fireflies not being there. Okay, so did anybody follow the monkey storyline? What was going on there?
It seemed like the scientists, they were testing the cordyceps infection on these monkeys. And so you find these audio recordings from the scientists, and it seemed like they're testing to see like how they can maybe beat it or develop a vaccine or cure or whatever. And then in the last audio recording, you hear we couldn't take the monkeys with us and that we should just kill them. But it's like, these guys deserve to run free. And as he's letting the monkeys, and he gets bit, he's like, one of them bit me. Oh no, one of them bit me. You can hear like in his voice as he's just like, I got bit. Oh no, I got bit. And then I was like, man, can the cordyceps be like, can monkeys get infected? Can they transmit it to other people? And I wonder.
They're carriers.
They're carriers, but they don't show symptoms. I guess it's because you find that scientist's body right at the end of the chapters.
Yeah, I wonder, that'd be funny if this was patient zero. This could be the whole Wuhan situation where they're researching the fungus and they accidentally
Hey
release
kids,
it.
don't work in a lab. Any lab. Don't work in any lab ever. Don't be a scientist. Scientists are losers who unleash ungodly forces on the world. Don't manipulate with genes. Don't test monkeys. Kids, don't touch monkeys. Leave the monkeys alone. So in that audio recording, we learned that he said the rest of the scientists, they're going to Salt Lake City. They're going to set up again there. We hear in the scientist's voice that he says, oh no, I got bit. Do we actually know that he infected and died that way? Or because he's sitting there in the chair. I feel like had he turned, we wouldn't have found his body that way.
He took his life.
Thought so. I just didn't remember that detail if he did or not. I assumed he did.
That's where they find the final audio recording where he says, we all packed up and we left to go to Salt Lake, which is good because then now they know where to go. And so they start to leave and then more bad guys attack.
Tell me I'm not the only one. I feel like I am. I'm the only idiot here who played this game more than once and didn't realize that David's people are the ones that attacked them at the university. There's only one line that says it though, and it's like when you're playing as Ellie and you overhear them talking outside of this house that you're passing through.
No, David straight up says
No, yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
David
a
says
cutscene where it's like the turn of, oh, David's a bad guy, even though he's already a creep.
I thought he was referring to something that happened between the previous sequence. And I thought that maybe it was like some part of the story that we never saw. It's difficult how I got there.
Not lost on us, though.
Not lost on literally anybody else, but I thought that maybe like they continued through other towns and killed other people. And
Oh,
it
dang,
was
there's
just
another
something we
time
never
lapse
saw.
we missed where they go murdering through a town.
There is a time lapse because the university and David's thing takes place in the fall and the winter. And that's why I was like, okay, is something happening? But that's how I got so disconnected.
Shan, did you know that David was a cannibal?
he's in the game.
They never say it, so I don't know that I believe. I'm skeptical.
You never saw him eating a human.
It's just
so-
heavily implied, but it's never.
If I don't see someone eat human flesh, then they're
Yeah.
not a cannibal.
Until I see
Those are the
him
rules.
like
Those are the
dismember a
rules.
human body, stick a piece of it on a spit, roast it, and then start chomping on it. Until the moment he chomps on that flesh, he's not a cannibal.
Okay, we
Yeah.
really have to move on to David because I'm excited about it. So this is where we get the moment of role reversal. Joel falls on a pike.
Who else really just felt like, oh, when he falls on that? Just the sound, the visuals of it, and
The
then him
sound
being
of,
pulled off
like
of it.
spaghetti or a cantaloupe smashing. Oh, but the other thing, before we get to the winter, them escaping the university, I just wanted to point this out because I think it's really important for their journey. The way that you are as Joel at the end of that episode, after you've been pierced with the rebar and you're completely helpless and you're bleeding out, and Ellie's killing bandits and seeing you through and getting you to the horse, all of that. I love how completely helpless Joel is through all that and how absolutely badass Ellie is. Because we talked about that role reversal, and we're going to get even more role reversal in this sequence with David. It's just another thing, time and time again, we see Joel being less and less invincible, more and more mortal, and we're seeing Ellie be more and more capable and more able to not just take care of herself, but take care of Joel. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that sequence. I thought it was so well designed and effective.
Yeah, this is the moment that plays out Joel's worst fears that he was trying to portray to Tommy, more so in the TV show, but like where he doesn't think he's enough to get Ellie where she needs to be. And it's less overt in the game. That was his reason. But I really think he's like, I'm afraid I'm going to fail her. This is him failing. And I love how it plays out in the show where it's like, he's training a lot more forcefully. You need to go back to Tommy. He needs to save you. Please go back. And she doesn't. And then it plays out the Left Behind DLC as an episode, which is like fantastic decision for the narrative perspective. What do you think was added or the justification in putting the Left Behind sequence in this episode?
I think that the reason that they did it like that in the video game is because obviously they package it as DLC. And so you can go back and get a more fleshed out story, because I do think that the story makes sense without that, but it is really valuable insight to getting a better understanding. And I think I liked how they put it there in the show because that's where it slots into the story. The Left Behind DLC takes place in that part of the story. And so it makes a lot of sense to just in the TV show to put it there.
Very effective. That was a DLC and that you can play it separately. I love how you're stumbling as Joel, you're moving really slow, and then it just jump cuts to her hunting in the winter. You don't even know at this point if Joel is still alive. And so that was extremely effective. You're like, oh no, what's happening? And you have to wait and get through this very quiet moment to even find out if he's still alive.
I do think it helps increase the tension and the stakes of this moment with Ellie, where you get to see how she lost Riley and she lost Fedra, and her entire life collapsed all within this one sequence. And we see that Joel has now become her entire meaning for existence at this time, and she's about to lose it again. And the moment that they cut back to her trying to save Joel is not after the entire Left Behind sequence plays out. It's while she's about to lose Riley. So we get to see the parallels of her frenetic panic play out in both sequences. So they reach this character climax so that you feel even more crippled and paralyzed by the state of mind that her character's in. But it's elevated by having played out this Riley sequence. You're even more in that emotional state that they can now take advantage of.
This may be a game we have to cover in the future, but the Walking Dead Telltale series with Lee and Clementine, there's a lot of shades of that in this sequence in the winter that I get that remind me a lot of the relationship between Lee and Clementine in that game. I know we're not going to talk about that today. I wanted to point out like that role reversal where Joel is completely helpless and Ellie is doing everything. We see her hunting deer. We see her trying to find medicine for him, keeping him alive. There's something so poignant about the role reversal in their relationship that even though Joel has failed, Ellie is the one keeping it all together. How conscious do you think Joel is throughout any of this period? Because we don't see him do much. He hasn't been in a coma for months, but we don't really see him like... I'm just trying to wonder like exactly how sick he is and how his days are being spent like in his brain.
It seems like, I don't know if how many of us have had a really bad fever where like it's like melting your brain basically. And you're just like, you can't like, you're not there, but you're there, you know? And I mean, he's, you know, he got pierced from the rebar and he's very clearly very infected. When Ellie goes back to him, he can't even really tell that she's there. So I don't think that he's catatonic. I think it's progressively getting worse. If it goes much longer without Joel getting medicine, he's going to die. Very clearly got a really bad infection that's causing him to have some kind of a fever. And towards the end, it seems like all he can really do is just lay there and let the fever melt his brain. But before Ellie comes back to talk to Joel, she meets David, David. So we were talking about the sequence before with Ellie and Joel, and her meeting David for the first time is one of my very favorite sequences because you're playing as Ellie, who is a little girl. She's like a 14-year-old girl alone in this very harsh and terrifying world. And she shoots a deer and is very excited to bring it back. Like, yeah, we've got food. And then as she's doing that, she comes across these two people who are David and I forget the other guy's name. She meets these people and then they like sit down and David's like, hey, we really need to meet. I'm with a group of people. We're very hungry. Can we trade you for it? And Ellie goes, medicine. Do you have medicine? And Ellie's like, you stay here with me. Other guy can go get medicine. She calls him Buddy Boy. Yeah. Buddy Boy can go get medicine. You stay here with me. And she's got her gun trained on him. And then as they're talking, she like slowly starts to lower her gun and lower her guard a little bit. And then they start to hear some infected. Well, it's just her and David. Buddy Boy is off getting medicine. Ellie and David are alone. David seems very friendly, very nice. They're starting to click and he's starting to be like, hey, you could come and live with us. Like really trying to extend a branch to Ellie. They're kind of attacked by infected. They fight him off together. And then they have one of my favorite conversations in the game where they're sitting there and Ellie's kind of relaxed and they're chatting and David's like, yeah, we make a good team. We really handled that situation well. And everything happens for a reason. Let me tell you why. I sent some people out the other day to go and look for food and supplies. Some of them came back and the ones that came back told me that the other ones got killed by a crazy man who was traveling with a little girl. And his voice shifts and the music changes and Ellie immediately like lifts up her gun and gets this look. And it's just such an awesome moment of, oh, David, he's just super nice. Like he's super friendly. We really made it through fighting those clickers. You know, maybe we can team up. And then it's just this shift from like kindness to like, oh no, this guy is a very serious threat, is so subtle, but so loud. And it's such an awesome moment. I really like that part of the game.
It's both Nolan North's acting, but also the writing. But yeah, exactly. I think the real pivotal moment is like where his voice placement changes and he goes from soft-spoken to creepy. And then she never lets off the pedal after that.
Nolan North has such a recognizable voice that every time I've ever heard him in a game before, I'm like, oh yeah, it's Nolan North. And I didn't know that David was played by Nolan North until this last time when I was doing research. And it's like, oh shoot, that's him. I had no idea. does such a good job in this role.
Ellie and David take on some clickers together, which I thought was a great touch because it kind of battle tests their relationship early on, Ellie and David, which gives you that tiny little glimmer of hope that maybe David isn't the worst ever. Because them fighting clickers together and him pulling out a gun and Ellie saying, wow, you had a revolver that whole time? And David, sorry. That I think gives you that glimmer of hope. They trick you just enough into thinking that David's not going to be the devil until he is. It's just beautifully crafted that they just long enough they string you along.
Yeah, they do a lot to reveal his character in this sequence to say he was always in control and he wanted Ellie to feel like she was, but that was never going to happen. It instantly makes him feel sinister and creepy in a way that you know that you can never take him at face value again, and they continue proving that. I'm more infatuated with like how the TV show portrayed this whole sequence. I think they're both incredibly effective, but they took a different narrative approach in saying that David was a religious leader and that he was inspiring a cult to stay together. I think just thematically that adds a lot because we've already seen the authoritarian approach of Fedra. We've seen anarchy through bandits and the raider, or I keep getting the names wrong, hunters. We've seen Fireflies with their idealistic approach to everything. And then we've seen Jackson. They establish in the show it's more of a communistic commune situation. But in the show, they go with what does it look like to control a community with religion? The good and especially the dark aspects of what that could
I love
look
that
like.
we've talked about how we get slices of the authoritarianism and the ideology and democracy. We're getting little slices of how people organize themselves. I love that we get a cult because I love that. I love that in the worst way. Cults are the worst.
Because of course, in this kind of a situation, you get charismatic people coming up to try to control people. And one of the most effective ways to do that is with religion. As a fairly faith-based person myself, I always find it really unsettling when people use faith and religion as a way to manipulate and control people and as an excuse to do bad things, which is exactly what David does in the show. And it's incredibly unsettling and really gross.
It's so gross. And I think it's gross to me. That you just described the way it's most gross to me is in the manipulation of people's faith, right? Like it's sure. Religion can be an incredible tool to mobilize people for good and for evil, right? Good in all of the best that an organized religion offers, right? Teaching people to be altruistic and take care of one another. But yeah, all of the evil that can come from manipulating it in the worst way. To me, it's like the most heinous of manipulations to use somebody's faith or to use religion as a way to get people to do the most horrible, atrocious things. This is the most gross organization we see. It's the worst.
It's the worst of humanity in The Last of Us. In this post-apocalypse world, I think David represents some of the worst of humanity.
I like how much more they flesh out this character in the show, in that we see that maybe he's found God and he's using it to justify who he is, but he does intimate to Ellie that this is just a tool for control because he loves control, and he's more overtly like he loves the struggle with Ellie. Like he gets off by that, which is like one of the creepiest parts of it's maybe the creepiest
so
part.
Gross.
He loves the fight.
So gross.
Like he has this incredibly dark and sinister thing. He says, this was a part of me before the cordyceps, but the cordyceps taught me that I can use it to really live. Like this is the beautiful part of like his sociopathy, is that he's completely rationalized his worldview and his way of controlling people. And he thinks that it is serving a greater purpose because he's helping people survive. And there is no justification too far to keep these people alive, but he's doing it for his own gratification.
I think it's really interesting because, to your point, Shan, he's doing it to now really live. Of course, I've taught him that. It's really interesting because this whole time you're going through and everybody's life seems worse. But then you get to David, and, in the show, his life is better in a really messed up way. And so I really love that deviation from, the game to the TV show, is showing that, there's some terrible people in this world that are thriving in chaos and this terrible thing where any kind of normal human being is going to be like, man, I miss the good old days of worrying about boys, worrying about school dances, but he's thriving.
Wasn't he a school teacher in the TV show?
He was a math teacher.
It doesn't say what he used to be in the game, but yeah, in the TV
I hope
show.
that didn't give him his taste for
flesh.
Children.
Pedophilia.
I think it
See?
did. Like a lot of times, those kind of people, they put themselves in a position of power to be able to manipulate and be around children.
always question the single people going to child beauty pageants.
Exactly. But here he is. Now he's able to control a whole group. And I don't know, maybe he's able to also be around children still.
I love how they used the religion as the vehicle for him justifying cannibalism in a way that I think worked in the game, but was elevated by the show. Him as a religious leader, he loses his power if people see that he's fallible. And he loses his infallibility if he doesn't provide. There's a few moments where he asserts his absolute control. One of them is when he smacks down the relative or sister or something of the man who was killed at the university because she tried to speak out and say something that David didn't want to happen. And so he smacks her. And then there's another moment with Troy Baker playing his secondhand man, where that character, he challenges. First of all, I want to go off on a tangent. Troy Baker's character, he says that maybe this is God's will, that Joel and Ellie should die. That's when David turns and he just stares him down. And he's like, that's not what I said we're going to do. And I am the source of God's will. And so you questioning that and thinking that you can speak in my place. And then it's a power stare until Troy Baker's character like looks down and averts his gaze.
A wounded puppy. He like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Yeah.
Yeah. For the record,
Shame.
Troy Baker being person who plays Joel in the game. And so this is his cameo. But yeah, all these moments of David gets really creepy and very powerful when people question him and he puts them back in their place.
I really love in the TV show where you actually get to see this society, because I feel like in the game, you never see that. So you're like, okay, is it just him and his men? But in the TV show, they show all these women and children as well. And I feel like he's manipulating his men. Like they all know that they're feeding the rest of their group with human meat. I feel like Troy Baker does a really good job of showing that shame, and he's very embarrassed by it. I feel like he is using that in his control because, hey, you know what we're also doing to keep everyone alive. And so I can control and manipulate you because you're in on this. You're just as guilty as me.
Yeah, that's another thing is in the show, it's pretty specifically stated that like some of the people know that they're being fed human meat, but not all of them do. It's this little community of people and David is feeding them human meat and most of them don't know. And that's not stated whether or not the people know in the game. In the game, they're just painted as this is a group of people and they are cannibals. And so you get a little more insight into the dynamic of it in the show and just how that feeds into David's ability to control his group and to assert his dominance over those people that you don't get as much of in the game.
Yeah, I think you explained that better. Thank you.
It's the Mrs. Love meat pies scenario. You know, if you were served a meat pie and you didn't know it was human, would you still enjoy it? Probably.
Totally. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine as long as you don't know. Yeah.
Now I'm thinking of the It's Sunny episode where they get a taste for human flesh, but it's not human flesh.
Human meat.
Okay, so we get to this moment where Ellie is locked up and David is contemplating how to navigate the situation because his community wants revenge and he wants Ellie. It's so much yuck. And we open on the scene with them chopping up a human so that we immediately get the understanding that, oh, there's something even grosser and more sinister behind veneer of this community that's just beyond creepy. Okay, so David comes in and he gives a plate to Ellie. I was curious, does everybody believe it's the venison or is it human?
What venison? They had nothing.
No,
They
deer
had the
that-
deer that Ellie
Yeah.
shot.
I don't believe it.
I think 1000% it was human meat, and it's showing David's aptitude of lying. And first playthrough, I wouldn't have thought this way, but coupled with the TV show, I think it makes a lot of sense for his character to hand out food that's obviously human meat, but lie about it.
In the game, she eats it. And in the show, she does it. She kicks it back at him.
I think human meat actually is more like chicken. So actually, I do think it possibly was
No,
venison.
cut that. Tell us more about what else do you know about human meat? Give us all the details.
Have you not eaten human meat? What is wrong with you? Haven't you? Don't you know it's just like chicken?
Is it something they have at Brazilian grills? They just carve off the little thing for you.
Yeah, they just come out with a leg on a
Yeah.
stick and they.
No, it's
Yeah.
really fascinating. Like I've looked into this a little bit because there's a movie called Fresh, which Fresh was played at Sundance Film Festival, and that's a really interesting movie. But it's this guy who kidnaps women and then slowly starts harvesting them for meat for these high-paying clients.
Gross.
Yes, but also if you eat human brain, you get some kind of disease.
Kuru.
See, so Shan
Yeah.
does know. He has done his research.
So now we'll need to look out for Shan and Emerlie. They're both armchair cannibals.
We know a little too much about this.
Human meat supposedly is more likened to chicken. So actually, I want to retract what I said before. I think it was venison because I think she would be able to tell it wasn't.
But I don't know if that's the kind of detail thing. It's drenched in sauce. I just think it's creepier for you to question. And if you're questioning, it's because it is me. But also, I think this is a power play by David. Okay, so play this out. He gets Ellie to convert to his side. I think revealing to her at some point in the future that she already has eaten human flesh is a power move to immediately indict her and bring her into the fold and say that she's complicit.
Yeah, you're
in
already
their
one of
activity.
us. Yeah.
Yeah, just any way that David can get his hooks in and manipulate and assert dominance, that's probably the case, which makes the fact that she ate it in the game really unsettling.
It could be in the game that, like, it could be that they
Yeah.
told two different stories. I don't know. Because Kuru, the disease that you do get from cannibalism, has an incubation period of 6 to 12
course.
months. And after that, you start to unravel and die.
Of course, as we all
Uh,
know.
And Ellie doesn't do that. So I think she ate venison in the game and she was.
Well, I think
offered
you can
human
get away
flesh in
with
the
eating
show.
human flesh one time and not get kuru.
Kuru is only from eating the brain.
How do we know?
Yeah,
This
got a
could be
little
fun.
brain.
You don't know the
You know?
brain.
Gonna have a lot of really weird incognito windows in my
Yeah.
browser after this episode.
How do you do these like research papers in college where you have to talk about specific
What about
subjects?
writers? Are all TV show writers on the FBI list?
How do you get Kuru?
How are they searching for this? Instead of saying what is Kuru, you say what in the hell is, so that when the FBI is researching, like, why are you looking all this
It
stuff
was
up? They can
crazy
say,
to me,
oh,
man.
what in the hell is this?
Yeah. I was
I
asking
don't
what
know
the hell
what
it
it
was. I
Just curious.
That's
I wasn't
brilliant.
making a bomb. I was just
Yeah.
curious.
How in the hell to make pipe bomb?
Where in the hell are the presidential candidates going to be in the next couple
Yeah.
weeks?
I was
Yeah.
curious.
Where in the
work.
hell can I find a human kidney?
To what temperature do I cook
Yes.
human calf meat? Or how in the hell do I? Oops, I ruined
Luke
it.
forgot
No,
the how in the hell that time. Yeah.
You're on a list now.
It's like chicken.
Tastes like chicken.
Just toss it
Oh.
in the slow cooker for a couple hours, dice up some vegetables, and you got a meal.
Onion soup mix.
What in the
with
hell
okra.
kind of vegetables pair with human meat?
After this sequence, we then get a chase sequence between Ellie and David and Joel trying to catch up to Ellie and following the tracks to do that and following the group of people that are like helping him find
We
the
also
way
get
there.
to watch him torture
Uh,
that dude first, which is awesome.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
I love that
Okay.
part. So Ellie gets out of this cage that David has her in. She's able to escape. She kills his right hand man.
Rip, buddy.
Cuts back to Joel, who the medicine that Ellie got is finally kicked in, and he wakes up. He's like, "Where's Ellie?" He starts to go look for her, and he finds some of those bandits. He captures two of them, and he does this thing, which has that I think is so dark and so genius. Where he's torturing the one guy in the chair. He's got two of them, and he takes the one guy. He's like, "Hey, I've got a map here. Point to where this place where you're holding Ellie. Point to it on the map." He puts the knife in his mouth. He's like, "Point to it on a map." And I'm going to go ask your buddy. Then I'm going to go ask him and if he points to the same place, it'll be okay. And so the guy points to the map, and then Joel kills the guy that just pointed and then goes over to his friend. And the friend's like, "I'm not telling you anything." I'm like, "I can't believe I'm not telling you anything." And then Joel just goes, "That's okay. I believe him." And then, and hits is like, oh, chills every time.
Oh, so yeah, Shan and I had a little conversation offline about this yesterday, and just seeing Joel at his most feral was amazing. Just to see this is who Joel was, probably in that time, that 20-year span. of surviving. Talked about him being on both sides of ambushes. This all of a sudden makes a lot of sense to see Joel in this space of jabbing a knife in somebody's kneecap, making a point to a nap, and then just mercilessly killing two of them.
Yeah. I thought this was interesting narratively because this is the first time we've seen Joel with this iconic behavior that he has. And it starts with a subversion, right? Because typically, storytelling wise, we would have seen it play out the right way. And the idealistic way of this is how he takes advantage of two people by stabbing them and then getting the other to point, and then he goes on his way. But the very first time we ever see Joel do this, he immediately kills the first person, which is a subversion of the formula, which I thought was an interesting take. But I think what that does for Joel is it elevates his wild card nature when he's in feral mode. And also, he knows from having practiced this out for a decade or more that it never fails. The first person always tells the truth, and he knows it. He knows how to extract information. He knows what humans are when he has fully controlled the situation. And so there was just no utility pragmatically in even going through the motions with the second person. He's just going to illuminate them. It does so much to elevate like who Joel is in the feral mode.
Papa Bear. He's an expert in interrogation tactics. That reminds me, I need to Google how in the hell to effectively interrogate.
Yes. To interrogate and murder two people.
He's kind of trying to refine this formula over 10 years and like, he's writing a tally. Okay, that one worked. Oh, it worked again. It worked. 100% accuracy. This always works.
Always kill the first guy.
Kill the first guy.
The first person
Han Solo
always
had it
tells me
right.
the
Shoot
truth.
first.
So right after this, you get a sequence that I really enjoyed, and I wanted to see if any of you guys noticed this whole detail. So you cut to Joel. After that scene, it cuts back to Ellie, and she's in the snow, and she's running away, and ends up in this like the diner area with David. And you hear in the background, there's this church bell going on because David has told all
I
those
wanted to
people
call that out.
He's like, get everybody out of here. And so they're doing this church bell, I'm assuming is some kind of an alarm to be like, everyone needs to leave. Like David's evacuating all of his people so that the people with weapons can stay behind and take care of Joel and Ellie and get their revenge. So you hear this church bell while you're running away as Ellie, and you fight through some people. And then you get to the little diner area where you have your kind of face off with David as Ellie. And then once you do that, it cuts back to Joel. And when you're in his shoes again, and then you hear the church bell. And I thought that was an awesome narrative through line that I didn't realize until this playthrough, but every time I've played the game, you feel really tense as Joel in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because when you're playing as Ellie, you hear the church bell and bad things are happening to Ellie. And then when you go and you switch to Joel's perspective, you hear the church bell and it does this thing in your brain where you're like, Ellie's in trouble and it's happening right now.
It's syncing up like the movie Inception.
Yeah, it's creating this connection between those two moments, those two perspectives that makes you feel even more protective as Joel and even more like ready to go find her right now because she's in trouble.
It's also spatially telling you how far away she is. And also what I love about the church bell, again, this is like you said, tension. This is one of the tensest moments in the game.
Yeah.
And it's because we get low visibility in the blizzard and we get the church bell disorienting your hearing. And so you can't necessarily geospatially place where all of the enemies are and you can't see them. Not that Joel knows, but for a dramatic irony that Ellie's in trouble. So you have to get Joel from point A to B. And so the fact that you have to slow down and do it methodically while you know that there's imminent danger. Yeah, exactly. Like you feel like you're being torn apart. You're like, I don't want to stealth kill, but I have to. And it's really hard.
You want
it's
a guns blaze through there so hard. I want a guns blaze through that compound and just murderize everything on my way. And that's really hard in that scene. Yep. And I love that you pointed out the blizzard and you can't do your bat skill echolocation thing in the blizzard and with the church bells. Yeah, the Batman echolocation skill is not available to you right there. I thought that was a really great detail to make you feel, again, like crippled in some way. We've talked about how certain enemies have strengths and weaknesses and they always take some advantage away from you. And taking away your hearing, I thought was really effective there, as well as your visibility, as well as it's a really high stakes moment and you want a guns blaze and you have to be patient so hard.
I did not know until this playthrough, I could just throw crap at David and bum rush him.
Yeah.
I had been like walking around so sneakily and it's forever. And I'm like, I hate how long this takes. I just have to stab him 3 times. I'm like, I'm just going to throw a brick at his face. And I did that. I'm like, oh, perfect. I can do this really fast.
How in the hell to throw a brick at someone's face?
I just want to point out that in The Last of Us, even though at the beginning of the first game, it tells you that you can use your flashlight on the clickers because they don't have eyesight anyways. It took me until the end of the second game to finally be brave enough to have my flashlight on. Like anytime
Like the game might be
any of
lying. Yeah.
yes, like I couldn't get past that. I was like, there's no way I can't. This is so terrifying. And so anytime an infected would pop up, I would turn off my flashlight and I would have to sneak up on them and do that in the dark. And I was not very good at sneaking and stealth killing. I didn't think you could.
One of the first sequences where you encounter runners and clickers is in that tilted building before the end of the first act and on the outskirts of Boston, right? And that's where I got in the habit of turning off my flashlight because I was told, okay, you can keep your flashlight on. They can't see you. And then immediately I kept my flashlight on and I was attacked. And at the time I didn't know the difference between clickers and runners. I was like, you just betrayed me. They can see. And I didn't realize that doesn't apply to clickers. And you just have to pay attention. And I wasn't paying attention. So I kept my flashlight off for a couple playthroughs as well.
I didn't like the first game the first time I played it because I was trying to stealth kill all these infected. And then other infected would just come and bum rush me. And I was like, okay, stealth mode really sucks in this game. And I played the second game multiple times and didn't have any issues. And I finally just replayed the first game. And I'm like, oh, I was just bad at it. You can stealth kill them. I was just too noisy or I was doing it around runners. So don't feel so bad, Tucker, that like it took you that long to figure out that you can just bum rush David and you don't have to be a stealth.
I had the same thing. I had the same thing this playthrough as well because I had always before David was a really tough fight because he's really fast and he sees you really easily.
And there's broken plates everywhere. And
there's broken plates everywhere for you to step on. But then I did the exact same thing this time. I noticed there was a lot of bottles and bricks around the diner. And I was like, why would they have these here? And I was like, oh, shoot, I bet you can throw them at David and just run. And then I tried and was like, this is like the fourth time I've played through this game. And I was like, oh, good to know.
Maybe on my fifth
made the fight a lot easier.
My instinct was to bum rush him and stab him. No, I never tried the stealthy approach
I was
with
bum
David.
rushing.
Where's
I was like, where's his bum?
Rush? I'm rushing with his stabby.
Way up
so
there.
hard. But yeah, my style was always, if I could bum rush the enemy, I tried to bum rush them. So that was usually, frontal assault was usually what I wanted to do if I could. Throw a brick at their head, stab. So I didn't even try to stealthy kill David. That sounds terrible. That sounds horrifying.
It makes it's a bad time.
This was the worst sequence, in my opinion, design-wise, when you can't use listening mode, because David doesn't make any sound. I kept waiting, like I found a perfect vantage point and I waited to see if he'd run around so I could pinpoint him and then go run around him. And there was a moment where he just stopped moving for 5 minutes. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? I can't hear him and I can't see him and he's not moving. And so I just had to walk around the entire restaurant until I found him and then bum rush him. This sequence is a lot harder with just the earphones. And I don't know if I approve of that.
I do like part of this, how you're not just in the cafe is on fire. And as the fight progresses, it slowly gets a little bit more on fire, harder to get through. Yeah, each time you stab him, the fire spreads a little bit more. And then it gets to a point where like when you're about to get the last stab, there's part of the restaurant where you can't even really go through there without getting hurt. And so I thought it was a smart way of narrowing the boss arena. It's like the boss fight, but narrowing the arena to restrict your abilities to make the tension rise organically with gameplay and not just narratively.
All right. So the final Ellie David encounter, though, you have lost almost all control. He's kicking you, you're down. You think that Joel better get there, but Ellie doesn't know he's coming and he pins her down. And that's when it's revealed that he wants her and he likes this moment. And I don't know, is this the worst character in the entire series?
The worst character in any series. David is awful.
On par with Umbridge, maybe worse.
No, worse than Umbridge. Umbridge got off on like power struggles with children.
Umbridge was beautiful, hateful, sadist. This, like, when he gets on top of her and he says, you can try begging, that is so gross. That's so gross. There's no more gross character in this series.
It was even creepier in the show. He says, what you don't realize is the fight is what I like the most, or something along those lines. It's a little more overt, but even creepier.
No, he says something else as well. He's like, "Oh, there's no fear in love." That's what it was.
Everything is so twisted.
There's so much, to the point where I feel a catharsis in Ellie taking the machete to this guy's head.
The machete,
butcher.
yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's a
Machete.
machete. It is a machete.
Get
I was like,
it.
yeah, girl, get it. But I love how they capture this moment of disorientation and like dissociation that she's feeling audio wise. Like you see the blood is being this invisible camera because they do a lot to try to make this feel like it's a real movie with film grain and all that stuff. But with the blood splattering against the screen, like it's blurring the screen, it's removing detail, it's making you feel like you're getting in her headspace of just like she's dissociating. And then the audio starts to dim out. And I think there's like a ringing sound. I don't know if anybody's been in a traumatic similar experience, but like the way that the world becomes just your headspace when you're in a traumatic episode, I've experienced maybe once in my life. And I felt like that captured the essence of what it is. And it was just incredible directing. Any other thoughts on that?
I'd agree with that completely. I think anytime where a piece of media can make you feel like you are the character that they want. And I think that moment does a perfect job of that because, like you said, it gives you you feel for Ellie, it's this gross situation. It's really awful. And then she is able to get a machete, chop him, and she just starts going to town on him. And the world just starts to go like this. And it really narrows to like this only what Ellie is experiencing and only what she can see. And as the player, you can see and feel that as well. I think I agree 100%. It's a really directed moment.
I love how they subvert from what you think is going to happen because here you are, Joel, you're rushing in and the whole time you're fighting David, especially when it really gets to that final moment. You're like, where's Joel? He's going to come in. He's going to rescue her. He needs to step in already. And she ends up having to save herself. She still doesn't know that Joel is alive. She thinks she's completely alone. And Bella Ramsey did such an excellent job at this just insane guttural screaming and just, it's so well acted.
Bella
by
does a beautiful
Bella.
job. It's primal.
The first time I watched it, I was like, oh, they're drawing this out even more than they did in the game. Because in the game, Joel comes in, pulls her off, and rescues her from going too far down that traumatic episode, even though it's maybe too far. In the show, Joel is too late and it's outside of the restaurant. And I think that more powerfully demonstrates that Joel has failed again to be her protector.
I had pulled up a screenshot of the moment that Joel shows up with Ellie, and she's got blood all down the side of her face and tears streaming down her face. And he's got his hands on her on either side of Ellie's face. I pulled up the screenshot again because this is one of the pictures that hit me the most powerfully playing the game. That Joel shows up, like you said, Shan, and he failed again to save her. She had to protect herself. She had to be hardcore. But this picture with her, with the blood all down her and the tears streaming with the blood, this little girl, my heart just breaks for her in this moment. The amount of stuff she's had to deal with, no matter how capable she is. And I think I've mentioned this a couple of times. We get experience after experience where we see how truly capable Ellie really is, what a remarkable, resilient person she is. But no matter how resilient you are, like this kind of trauma, this kind of nonsense, this hits you in a way. I worry for looking at her face if Joel weren't there in that moment to help her pick up the pieces after that kind of myopic, dissociative, traumatic episode. I worry about what happens to Ellie after this if Joel wasn't there in that moment to share in that pain with her. The digitally remastered version is worth the money for me for just that one screenshot.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Luke. I think that moment is really like when you see that fear and trauma in her eyes and she's soaked in blood and it's just this really poignant, powerful moment. And it's a really important moment for her and Joel because it's where, even though Joel was too late, Ellie, I think, feels emotionally rescued by Joel being there right after it happens and gives her a hug. And it's important for Joel. And I don't know if I'm stealing anyone's thunder here, but this is where Joel calls Ellie baby girl. He goes, "It's all right, baby girl." And it's like, that's something that he called Sarah. And so in my brain, this is the part where for Joel, a switch flips and it's like, Ellie is my daughter now. And there's no going back after that. Joel calls her baby girl and then that's it. And now nothing is off the table. Joel will do anything to keep Ellie safe.
I forgot about the detail of baby girl and how he called Sarah that. To your point, I was going to ask everybody, what is it about the David encounter and this final moment between Ellie and David that locks in what they're both going to be in the final act? What is it about this moment that locks in that Joel is going to go gangbusters on the Fireflies and makes Ellie decide that her life, because at this point, she doesn't know that it would require her life to save others. She just wants to save others. I think this is the moment that locks in that she would give her life in place of everyone else. Does anybody agree with that? Or
I certainly feel
counter
that
it?
for Joel, after this moment, I don't think heaven or earth is going to stop Joel from being there for Ellie. I think this moment really solidifies that relationship. The use of the term baby girl for her, she is now his daughter. I think if nothing else, this solidifies for me that there's nothing in the world that Joel wouldn't do for Ellie after this. Nothing, including murdering a bunch of innocent scientists, right? There's nothing he wouldn't do. I mean, innocent, I wanted to put it in air quotes. They are working in a kind of a form of altruism. They're trying to save the world.
I am going to save that argument for the last episode.
Even if those scientists were innocent, if it meant saving Ellie's life, like, I think this to me solidifies Joel. Nothing's off the table when it comes to saving Ellie.
I think this is really sad because this is the point where she is no longer the optimist. This is where she starts to dissociate even into the next chapter. When they get to Salt Lake City, she's shut down. She's not telling her jokes. She's, staring off into the distance. And I don't feel like she ever recovers from that, unfortunately. And I think it just kind of plays into her character for this game into the next game where she'd rather not be alive anymore. Unfortunately, she's no longer that happy kid she had to grow
this
up
kind of trauma, it
in
just
that moment.
ruins your life. It just totally ruins your life. And for it to happen to children like that's what to me is the most poignant and painful about this episode, is that it happens to, she's 14 years old, right? She's a child. And for this kind of traumatic episode, that's something that no amount of therapy makes you forget. She deals with the trauma of this forever, and it's so tragic.
David deserved every machete chop to the face.
I didn't really think about this in solidifying Ellie's story. I always viewed it from Joel's perspective. But yeah, to your point, Emerlie, that trauma sticks with her all throughout part 2. And just reflecting back, that makes part 2 so much more beautiful, understanding that this trauma is what caused her to be so shut down in those moments. I don't necessarily know with her decision of this is going to take my life. I kind of am torn between, I don't want to, Ellie feeling like she doesn't want to be part of this world anymore, or she wants to have her life have meaning, where she's gone through this big journey of just all the killing worth it.
Her two biggest moments, her two biggest catalysts in the story is Sam and David. And what Sam did is say, I can have a purpose. It's saying that I can save other people. And that's when she realizes that can give her life meaning. But David is the moment that says, I would even give my life for it because I don't want to live in this world anymore. I think this is what breaks her and says that I just don't want to deal with this. I don't know where the balloons came from.
It's because you were doing the peace sign.
I've been trying to figure out thumbs up and how all that
Peace sign is balloons, thumbs up is
Nothing's
fireworks.
happening.
Anyways, but I agree with that. I think it's a really divine shaping moment for both of them that leads really well into the next chapter.
I also think the balloons need to stay in the cut with Shan's.
We can't do anything about it. That is rasterized during my most poignant,
authentic. Yeah. For those of you listening at home, Shan did a peace sign and it made balloons on his screen. Yeah.
Right when I was talking about Ellie being willing to sacrifice her life. Yep.
Yay,
Just
celebration.
The right
If we
thing
were
to
on Zoom, I
punctuate
would
the
have done that
moment.
little party emoji in the
Yeah.
Do it. Never mind.
It's so selective. Yeah. It's not going to happen. All right. So next episode, we're going to dig into Joel and Ellie in the third act of the game. Joel makes his final decision to be Ellie's father, essentially. And we're going to get into the Left Behind DLC and discover Ellie's full backstory with Riley. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
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 Outro. Bleep-a-doof, bleep-a-deep, bloopity blow.